Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Mark Moss Show, where we talk about the decentralized revolution, talking about the way the world's changing, of course, through the lens of politics, finance, and technology. And we're running through some of the latest breaking stories and news headlines of this week. And, we talk about the decentralized revolution, how we're moving from a unipolar world of peace and harmony and global trade and just-in-time supply chains and dollar homogeny, and moving to a multipolar world with multiple leaders and broken supply chains and broken alliances and things like that. And it's important to kind of document the process as we're going through this. Now, I've done extensive work talking about how this happens in periods of time on a 250-year time frame and how we're there now, but we're watching it happen in real time. And so when people ask, when is this going to happen? I'm like, it's happening right now. And I think, we can look at lots of signposts. I really would start to say that, I would say that it really started with Brexit and Trump being elected. So really back about 2016 is really when the pendulum started to swing the other way and the world started to go this direction back to leaving the globalist agenda, going back to more of like a nationalistic agenda. And so we've been on this trend for a while, and it has really been sped up, of course, with the Russia, Ukraine, U.S. war that's going on, which is now potentially spilling over into China and even the Middle East into potentially some sort of like a World War III or something like that, it's just insane. It's just insane. I mean, this is where we're at right now. I couldn't imagine ever that we would get here, but yet here we are. And so we have this situation where it's really the NATO, the U.S. NATO at war with Russia, using Ukraine as a proxy. There's been numerous reports from very credible, high-ranking people who have said multiple times that peace has been brokered. Like Zelensky and Putin have wanted to get peace, and the U.S. won't allow them to make peace. And so we know that to be true, because if the U.S. just stopped sending money and weapons, the war would be over. Peace would have been reached by now. Now, unfortunately, in a war, just like an argument, there's really no winners, right? Nobody wins an argument, they say. Nobody wins a fight. Nobody wins a war. And so, unfortunately, in order to end this, hopefully a peace treaty can be brokered. In a peace treaty, probably both sides aren't super happy. They realize that it's in the best interest to accept this peace treaty, but they're not really happy with the way it did. They probably have to make concessions that they didn't want to make. But we know that we don't know 100%. We know that credited people have said this, but we also know, like I said, if the U.S. stopped providing funding and stopped providing weapons, that this would all be over. But yet here we are, and they're not. Now, I listened to this interview with Jordan Peterson and Tulsi Gabbard this week, which was very informative. Highly recommended if you care about this topic. And just go onto YouTube and search Jordan Peterson, Tulsi Gabbard. But Jordan Peterson, he's so good at unpacking things, and he was just asking the question, like, what does winning look like? What does winning look like? Is there a win? And to the point I made, there is no win. So what does it look like? And we know that now, as things have been going on and on, now apparently China now is saying they could potentially help Russia out in the side of the war. Now, of course, China has massive needs and motivations to do so. Well, motivated because of their needs. They need what Russia has, which is the commodities. If you could take one of the largest commodity producing nations in the world, like Russia, and match them up with the greatest producer of goods in the world, which is China, and you put them together, that is a massive alliance, an alliance that the U.S. would not want to have. And so here we have China saying potentially they'll support Russia, and the U.S. came out and condemned that. They condemned that. As a matter of fact, they condemned that. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken made the accusation on Sunday where he said Chinese companies have already been supplying Russia with non-lethal aid and may soon do more. He says, quote, "The concern that we have now is based on information we have that they're considering providing lethal support. And we've made very clear to them that would cause a serious problem for us and in our relationship," Blinken said. When asked what lethal aid China might deliver, Blinken said, "Weapons." And so he's basically saying this, outright, right on the news. And as you might imagine, it drew furious comments from China on Monday. Not in a denial. China didn't deny it, but they got mad. And they said, they said, quote, "It is the U.S., not China, that has been pouring weapons into the battlefield," end quote. That's from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs spokesperson for China. Quote, "The U.S. is in no position to tell China what to do. We would never stand for finger pointing or even coercion and pressurizing from the U.S. on our relations with Russia," end quote. Whew. You want to get somebody mad? Accuse them of something they haven't done. You want to get somebody even more mad? Tell them what they can and can't do. And so here we have Secretary of State Blinken saying on public news that China could do this or should do this, and they better not. And China's like, wait a minute. You're the ones putting all the weapons on the battlefield. You're the ones starting this war. You're the ones perpetuating this war by pouring weapons onto the battlefield. The U.S. is in no position to tell China what to do. Wow, strong words. But you can see how this is certainly going, which is not good. And then we saw this week Zelensky says, if China allies itself with Russia, there will be World War III. Who the heck is this guy to say what's going to be World War III? Why does the entire world care who controls Crimea? That's the capital of Russia, of Ukraine. Who in the world cares? Does anybody in the world want their entire life threatened because of nuclear war over that? Because Zelensky says that now the world is going to go to war? He says, quote, "For us, it's important that China does not support the Russian Federation in this war," Zelensky says. And like I said, Blinken warned that there would be consequences if China would back them. I mean, this is just insane. And it's gotten to a point where we should be worried. This week, Putin came out and gave a speech, which I think is important to touch on for a couple topics. One, it sounded pretty good overall. I mean, he basically said that he blasted the degradation of humanity and the family unit. He basically dedicated a portion of his State of the Nation address to blast left-wing attacks against the family unit, normalization of pedophilia, saying that pedophilia and sexualization of children have become the new normal in NATO nations. He's not wrong. He said, well, with Russia winning on the battlefield in Ukraine, the globalist leaders of the West have turned to information attacks that target kids with the express intent of destroying our culture and historical truth. They cannot ignore the fact that Russia cannot be defeated on the battlefield, so they're waging increasingly aggressive information attacks. First of all, targeting the young generations, lying on every step, distorting historical truth, attacking our culture, the Russian Orthodox Church, and other traditional religious institutions in our country. And what they're doing in the West to their own people is even worse, Putin went on to say. Look at what they're doing to their own people. They're destroying the institution of family, their cultural historical identity, and various perversions with regards to children up to pedophilia are accepted as the new norms. Yes, NATO countries, America is trying to destroy the institution of family. 100%. That's true. Their cultural historical identity is gone. So we used to have an American identity of shared values of freedom and responsibility and private property and the ability that someone could come here with nothing and build their life. We used to have those values, but today all those values have been destroyed, and now supposedly we align on identities. So now supposedly whether you're man or woman or trans or you're gay or straight or you're black or white or you're male or female, you align on that, not values anymore. which is exactly why this country is so torn today. We're more alike than they want us to believe. They want us to believe that we're all different based off the color of our skin or our sexual orientation, but that's not true. We're Americans with shared values, but of course, as Putin rightly points out, they destroyed the cultural historical identity, our historical identity that made America great, that brought all the immigrants here from all over the world. That shared historical identity is gone. And then even as he said, the perversions with regards to children up to pedophilia. So now they want to normalize pedophilia. They call it a minor attracted person now. They've tried to change the name. No. Let's not call it that anymore. People don't like that word. Let's call it just a minor attracted person. So you're just a person that's attracted to minors. It's the same thing. They're normalizing pedophilia. What are they doing to the kids? In schools here in California, in middle schools, they have tampons in the boys' bathrooms. They have kitty litter boxes in schools. And even worse, they're trying to allow transitioning where kids can change their whole life by changing their sexual identity, having surgeries, puberty blockers, all these transition surgeries, even without consent of their parents. Those are perversions with regards to children. You can't drink until you're 21 because you might get drunk and make a bad decision, but at 12, you can change your whole life? Take out your reproductive organs at 12? But don't drink till you're 21 because you could happen to make a bad decision. You can't vote till you're 18 because you're not smart enough about politics to know what you may or may not want to vote, but at 12 you can just take out your reproductive organs. So what he's saying is correct. The one thing that I fear, though, is that, actually, before we talk about this, he goes on to talk about the priest. He says, attacking our culture and attacking the Russian Orthodox Church and other traditional religious institutions. And so you don't have to go super far to see that this is exactly what Zelensky has done. If you think that we are fighting for democracy and freedom in Ukraine, you are sadly mistaken. Now, I don't want to see anybody get invaded, and I don't want to see anybody killed, and I'd like to see everybody kind of sit to their own borders. However, if you think what we're doing in Ukraine is fighting for freedom, you are sadly mistaken. And there's 100 data points I can give you, but let's just talk about one. Zelensky took a page directly from the Bolshevik playbook. So the Russian Bolshevik revolution in the early 1900s, where they basically, a communist Marxist takeover, went and killed everybody. And he's basically doing the same thing. He announced a ban on the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, a government-sponsored crackdown. Zelensky claims they can't be trusted because Scripture isn't under the control of the Ukrainian government. That's right. God's word, the Scripture, lies outside of government control. It is what it is. It's a book that was written thousands of years. It's the oldest book. As Jordan Peterson sums up, it's not just true, it's the truth itself. It's the first manuscript we have. And so, yes, it's not under control of the Ukrainian government or any government for that matter. Zelensky outlawed the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, just like the Bolshevik crackdown implemented before. Now, the Russian Orthodox Church is 52% majority of Ukrainians. So, if you think we're standing for democracy, if you think Ukraine is democracy, the majority, over 50% of the people, are Orthodox Christians. So, wouldn't democracy be what the people want, but yet not to them? They went and shut it down because, to Zelensky's quote, it's not under the control of the Ukrainian government. So just like the media outlets, the churches now are only allowed to operate in Ukraine with the express consent and direct control of the Zelensky government. So if you think there's freedom or democracy and we're fighting for that, you are sadly mistaken. That is not the case at all. So Putin was right about saying that. However, what I'm afraid that Putin might be doing is really trying to appeal to this entire segment of the world that feels that they're being shut down, where their voice isn't being heard. Because sort of like any good president would do, sort of like Trump. Trump hit a chord with people talking about, legal immigration, things like that. And that's sort of like what Putin's doing. However, what does his own history and his government say? So he certainly persecuted and killed lots of people in Russia. Russia is not the bastion of freedom in the world. And so while he is saying these things, which leads people to go, wow, he kind of gets it. Maybe he's a good guy. I wouldn't go that far. I wouldn't say that Putin is a good guy. Like I said, by historical standards, he certainly is not. So be careful with that. It's right. What he's saying is right. I'm afraid that he might have some suspect intentions, and I guess only time will tell. However, so the speech went out. He went on the offensive. Now apparently the U.S. is trying to pick a war with China, saying, hey, you better not or else. And on top of that, Vladimir Putin now said that Russia is pulling out or suspending the nuclear arms treaty. So we've been in a nuclear arms treaty with Russia. It's called START, S-T-A-R-T. It started in 1985. Back then, Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev and President Ronald Reagan made this treaty saying, quote, a nuclear war cannot be won, so must never be fought. Is under something called the mutually assured destruction. Like, hey, if we go to war, we're both going to kill each other, so let's just not go to war. And so we've had this. It's been affirmed as recently as January 22 by Putin and Biden, as well as leaders of China, France, and the UK, who all have nuclear weapons. But now Russia says it's suspending its participation in the treaty. That's not good. It sounds like escalation, in my opinion. It sounds like we might be actually getting closer to nuclear war than we were anytime since 1985. One thing when Donald Trump was elected, all these people were saying, he's a hothead, which he is, and that's one of his greatest character flaws. Is he kind of is this hothead, and he kind of says things off the cuff. And so they said he's this hothead, and if he's elected, he's going to lead us into nuclear war. We just know it. Well, he didn't. As a matter of fact, he was nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize because for the first time in decades, he actually brokered peace in the Middle East. He got rid of ISIS that had propped up under Obama. He got rid of that, and he brokered peace in the Middle East, and the world had peace. But under Biden, we're now facing nuclear war. We're facing nuclear war with Russia. We're facing war with China. And we're even now facing war in the Middle East with Israel and Iran. So it wasn't Trump taking us to nuclear war. It's Biden that did that. Now, this isn't a left or right thing. Well, it sort of is. It sort of is. So now Russia's pulled out of their treaty that's been brokered. And for what? Again, for what? A poll was just recently done, and that Americans do not support shipping of weapons to Ukraine. An Associated Press Center for Public Affairs Research found that Americans do not support shipping weapons and tax dollars off to Ukraine. For a war with no end in sight that has already cost U.S. taxpayers about $113 billion in less than a year. Americans are more concerned about how they'll foot their wildly inflated grocery bill or handle declining wages, due in part to the influx of migrants at the U.S. border. Meanwhile, a fentanyl crisis, thanks to truckloads of illegal drugs smuggled into the country via the same disastrous border policies, is wreaking havoc on poor blue-collar communities. More than 107,000 Americans died from drug overdoses in 2021. Americans want Biden to focus on issues at home. So, home, let's talk about that. 5 million illegal aliens poured through our southern borders. 5 million. That's an invasion. I would say that's a failed policy. We have the number one cause of death from 18 to, I believe, 44. You can check me on that. 18 to 44, I believe, is fentanyl, which pours through our southern border and being shipped over here from China. So there's an attack by China coming in through our southern border, 5 million people invading the country. The number one cause of death is because of that. We have grocery bills out of control that can't be handled. We have attacks all over our energy grid on our from our energy grids to all of our core stuff. I talked about that in an earlier segment, how the attacks on our energy grid have almost doubled last year. Could that be that of the 5 million people that entered the government country illegally could be potentially terrorists coming? So we have a massive crisis going on at home. Students graduating from high school that can't read or write, and now we're arguing about kitty litter boxes in high school. We have a massive problem at home, so failed policy at home, and then failed policy abroad. We're literally facing a nuclear war, and it's escalating. And now we're at war with China. So yeah, I would say people are more concerned about what the heck is going on here than we are sending more weapons and more money to Ukraine. This says that U.S. taxpayers have already spent the U.S. has already sent 113 billion. I've seen reports that show up to 200 billion has already going to Ukraine. 200 billion. 200 billion when people can't afford groceries at home. And that probably is even more. We don't even know. We know that the Pentagon now, the Department of Defense, couldn't find another $2.5 trillion. But we don't know where it went. Now I say another because this is not the first time they've lost trillions of dollars. As a matter of fact, they've never passed an audit. They can't pass an audit. They can't even show where the money's going. So between $100 to $200 billion has gone there. And Americans don't support this. You would think the president, or any politician for that matter, should be out there thinking about what's in the best interest for Americans. And any president of any country should think about the best interest of their people. What is going to war over there supporting? How is that in the best interest for our people? We're not supporting freedom. We're not supporting democracy. We've already talked about that. So what are we doing? And now we're supposedly crossing another red line. So we've already crossed proverbial red lines. We know that NATO said that we would never move east. Russia wants a buffer in between where NATO is and where they are, which makes sense. And so Ukraine was supposed to stay this neutral place. And as Ukraine was moving into NATO, Russia said, "Hey, don't do it. Don't do it. You've already gone back on every commitment you've made. Ukraine's the last stand. Don't do it. Don't do it. That's the red line." And yet we did. And there's the red line. And now they're saying that Blinken, Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, is now saying that if they want to get Ukraine to retake Crimea, and that would be a red line for Putin that could lead to a wider Russian response. So Russia got Crimea, and now they're trying to get Ukraine to take back over Crimea. And they're saying right here, this is a red line. Don't do it. And I'll ask you again, no matter where you are listening from in this world today, you could be at risk of a nuclear war. This is where we're going. If you're young enough, you could go to war and potentially die over this, or your kids or your grandkids could go to war. Over what? Over Crimea? Can you even point to it on a map? Why do you care who controls Crimea? But that's what Ukrainian forces want. It says their crosshairs are on Crimea. That's where they want to go. They want to go where the red line is. They want to continue to escalate. And I'm going to tell you again, if you just tuned in, don't let anybody tell you this is a proxy war. This is the U.S. is at war with Russia. And I say that because without the hundreds of billions of dollars we've given them, without the weapons that we've given them, this war would be over. We have all the American leaders that have come out and said, we will win. We will stick with it until the end. So this is not a proxy war anymore. This is a war. Russia knows it, and you better know it too. And this is spiraling out of control. As I said, China is now potentially jumping in. They're mad because the U.S. is trying to tell them what to do. And now we have this growing shadow war between the U.S., Israel, and Iran. So remember, Trump had brokered peace in the Middle East, and now that's all falling apart. We can see that preparing for an armed conflict with Israel and the U.S., the IRGC, which is the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, have evaluated their weaponry in Ukraine. selling Russia the Shahed drones. In return, Moscow has pledged to help Tehran in air defense and potentially help to enrich their nuclear program, which is a major red line of Washington and Tel Aviv. Of course. So now the U.S. has been trying to keep nuclear weapons out of Iran's hand, and here Moscow is like, hey, we'll help you out. And we'll give you air defense, and you give us some drones, and let's just all work together. This is another war spiraling out of control in the Middle East. If Iran gets nuclear weapons, obviously that threatens Israel. Israel said that they would attack before that ever happens. And so now we have war with China and Taiwan and in Russia and Ukraine and now with Israel and Iran. And this is spiraling out of control. This is not getting better. This is getting worse. This is leading to the decentralized revolution. What does all this mean for us as investors? Well, it means that inflation is going through the roof. It means prices are going to get high. It means that if you think supply chains were a problem 2 years ago, just wait until what happens next. As the pendulum swings back, we're not done with globalism yet. And so at a time when globalism is dead. I mean, it's dead. Come on, look. I mean, what's happening in China, Taiwan, Russia, Ukraine, Israel? I mean, it's over. But doesn't stop the globalist push from trying to go forward. And one of the biggest stories I saw this week, one of the scariest stories I saw this week that you need to be aware of is that the United States government wants to lay down its sovereignty to be underneath the globalists. Underneath the globalists, so the U.S. is no longer the captain of their own ship. Now, this started with Obama, okay? Obama went around, he was the first president going around and apologizing for the U.S. Obama laid us under the power of the globalists, including put us into the Paris Accord, including putting us under the UN. He brought the UN in to watch U.S. elections, okay? And as soon as Trump became elected, he went to Davos and he said, look, the U.S. is a sovereign nation. The U.S. will never lay down its sovereignty to globalists. As the president, my job is to think about America first. Now, he said, look, we'll cooperate, we'll work with everybody, but we're always going to be thinking about Americans first. So he pulled us out of the Paris Accord. And of course, that's what put the target on his back, and the globalists had to get him out. Biden, the first day back in office, put us back into the Paris Accord, back under this globalist. And now, here we are. We have the Biden administration wants to give all of our power of health and pandemic response to the WHO. The WHO, which has been proven completely corrupt, which has been proven completely incompetent, which has been proven to be under China's control, now they want to put us under that. As member states of the World Health Organization, WHO prepare to gather in Switzerland next week and negotiate final terms of an accord that will give the WHO centralized authority over U.S. policy in the case of a pandemic. What? Wait, what? Did you get a vote on that? Did you hear anything about that? No, you didn't. Well, we want to give the WHO authority over the U.S. in the case of a pandemic. Now, luckily, we have some Republican senators pushing back on this with an effort to reinforce congressional power to authorize treaties. Now, this draft accord would be, quote, legally binding on all 194 member nations, who gives the WHO the authority to declare pandemics and submits member countries to the, quote, the central role of the WHO as the directing and coordinating authority on all international health work in areas like, lockdowns, treatments, medical supply chains, surveillance, and, yes, and disinformation and false news once a pandemic is declared. Now, you might know that we're still in a pandemic in the United States, and so what's even in a pandemic anyway? So the central role of WHO, we're going to basically give them all power over lockdowns, treatments, medical supply chains, surveillance, and disinformation. Wow. 17 U.S. senators led by Ron Johnson, Republican of Wisconsin, introduced the, quote, No WHO Pandemic Preparedness Treaty Without Senate Approval Act on February 15th. States the pandemic accord must be deemed a treaty, thus requiring the consent of a supermajority of the Senate. Other sponsors of the bill, all Republicans, of course. I'm not going to read them all out here. The WHO, along with our federal health agencies, failed miserably in their response to COVID, Senator Johnson stated. This failure should not be rewarded with a new international treaty that would increase the WHO's power at the expense of American sovereignty, end quote, Senator Johnson. But some doubt this bill, even if approved, will stop the WHO Accord from going into effect once President Joe Biden signs it. Are you listening here? The Obama-Biden administration is back doing the same thing, trying to lay down U.S. sovereignty to globalist, non-elected leaders. Currently, the United States is the largest contributor to the WHO's $6.7 billion budget. Of course, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundations is the second largest donor to the WHO, contributing to 9% of its budget. So the U.S. and Bill and Melinda Gates, they're the main funders of the WHO. And it remains unclear if the Biden administration will need Senate approval for this, which is insane. How can somebody lay down our sovereignty? I mean, this is just insane to me. Now, like I said, this is not a smooth operation. Now, they're going to have control over 194 nations, but these 194 nations are breaking apart. I certainly don't think Russia or China are going to want to lay down their sovereignty to the WHO. I highly doubt that's going to be the case. So we're getting a lot of pushback on this. Now, another piece of news this week, I talked about before, Jordan Peterson is setting up a new organization to counter the World Economic Forum. So there's pushback there. That's what capitalism does. Another one I want to talk about this week, we saw Vivek Ramaswamy. He announced that he is running for president. Now, he's the author of a couple books called Woke Inc., Inside Corporate America's Social Justice Scam, and also Nations of Victims, which is dealing with identity politics. He's also the co-founder of Strive Asset Management, which was set up to work against BlackRock. And he says that America is in the midst of a national identity crisis. We embrace secular religions like climatism, COVIDism, and gender ideology to satisfy our need for meaning, yet we can't answer what it means to be an American. He emphasized the importance of merit and decrying illegal immigration and affirmative action. So he described affirmative action as national cancer. So we're seeing the pushback to this. So on one side, we have Obama and Biden, pushing us to lay down our sovereignty to globalists, and yet we have other people standing up to counter this. No, we need to cancel this. We need to push this back. This is the volatility at the top before the pendulum swings back. Now, this is getting massive, as you might imagine, massive public support. We can see another poll this week that says Americans prefer businesses stay out of politics. The majority of general election voters say they would prefer to do business with companies that do not engage in politics and tolerate viewpoints of employees and customers across the board. Who would have thought? Who would have thought? The people, you and I, we're tired of this. We don't want businesses involved in politics. We don't want what Klaus Schwab is calling the public-private partnership. We want businesses like BlackRock out. We don't want them pushing their agendas on us. And we can see this. It's happening in polls. We can see the rise up of alternative news sources. We can see Jordan Peterson rise and push back. And even Elon Musk this week came out and blasted a one world government at the World Government Summit. He says, quote, I think we want to be a little cautious about being too much of a single civilization, because if we're too much of a single civilization, then the whole thing may collapse, he said. He praised what he called, quote, civilization diversity. I think we want to be a little wary of actually cooperating too much. It sounds a little odd, but we want to have some amount of civilization diversity, so if something goes wrong with some sort of part of civilization, that the whole thing doesn't collapse. which is exactly what happens. You see civilizations rise and fall, and we need to have different civilizations that can compete, and so we can start to see the better way. If you're just tuning in, you're listening to the Mark Moss Show. I've been talking about of course, like I talk about every week, the decentralized revolution, how the world is breaking apart right before our very eyes, and we're seeing it. Russia, Ukraine, in the Middle East, Iran, Israel. We're seeing it with China and Taiwan. It's happening, and it's happening fast. That's what I got today. I appreciate you listening. Send me a message. Let me know if you're listening and any questions you have. Until next time.